Salutare și bine v-am regăsit la emisiune. Revine în emisiune Venerabilul Markus Getzner pentru că a venit la Cluj să vorbească despre răbdare. Venerable, welcome back in our show. How are you?
Thank you very much. I'm fine, and I want to express my gratitude for inviting me to such a place, to Cluj, and I'm very moved to see the architecture, and it's very, very beautiful, and this place, sure, in particular, being here. And I don't take it for granted, not at all. And I see also a responsibility, at least to share at least something with you or with all of you. If that can be done, it's fine. If not, okay, then I just failed. It's also possible. This also take into consideration. This possibility is there.
The theme of today's meeting is patience. Why is so important patience? Not only in Buddhism.
In general, it's very important. It's not, patience is attitude. It's actually a capacity of one's mind to be not disturbed by, by harm and difficulties and inconveniences. Despite the fact you experience that, the mind remains very, very stable, and through having a stable mind, you have a certain clarity. That's a great advantage. If one feels so disturbed and agitated and upset, then out of that, we commit a lot of faults. One gets very angry, one gets very, very upset. There comes a lot of those very ugly states of mind, they manifest. But not only that, then there's also outcome. That means it also manifests then either through one's speech, very harsh speech, which kind of others feel very offended by that, or then physical actions, like destroying the life of others or give them really, to inflict harm on others, physically, and this is due to that the mind is so kind of agitated and gets under the influence of anger, and that what counteracts the anger or hatred is attitude of patience, and that has to be cultivated, to be trained as all those different skills, what you can see in the museum, the architecture and the images, they're also a result of somebody who's trained in that field and mastered it. Whatever, may it be language or visual arts. And here same, you make an effort, you somehow on a regular basis, you cultivate that attitude until you reach a certain what we call a perfection. And then, whatever the circumstances are, one remains quite relaxed, And that's good. It's better for oneself, but especially for all others, because one lives always in a society and with others, and it's very important to also to behave in a manner which is, very conducive and also very agreeable for others, which are not to disturb their minds or treating them, disrespectful and so on. It's not good, I think. Well, it's similar, those who did that place, it's certain they mastered their, handcrafts or the field of art. And here similar, you try to train this inner field of the mind is trained and cultivated. It's really cultivated. And by that you reach those capacities. And that can be done by anyone. It's not something which is only for Buddhists. No. The same. Anger is always very, very ugly, or hatred. Regardless if you are somebody who belongs to, to a certain culture or regards one as a religious practitioner, or it doesn't matter, even you being an atheist, it doesn't matter in whomever and wherever and what age, it doesn't matter. When anger arises, it's very disturbing, and the outcome, what it produces, is not so useful. Therefore, there's a value in training in patients. There's great advantages for everybody, regardless of age and gender and cultural background or religious background, doesn't matter. It's only advantages in training that. And sure, the earlier you start, the better. That means. But anyway, it's never too late, even if you're very old already and you start a little bit to familiarize with that. It's only advantages. And it's anyway a good preparation because our existence is characterized by a lot of, let's say, inconveniences and shortcomings and problems that one learns to react in a manner which is, one should be able to transform those situations. And anyway, one will be confronted sooner or later with old age and sickness and all those things and death, that one can really go through those situations having a mind which is stable and having this clarity and stability is very, very important. Because on that base you have more possibilities to act in a constructive way. Therefore one does it, one sees the advantage. And the shortage of those other states of mind, like anger or hatred and wrath and grudge and all those things and cruelty anyway. Therefore, there is a great advantage in training, or even trying an attempt to it already is also, there's a benefit. Even one fails, but just make that effort in that direction, it's already very, very good doing it.
Which is the main opposite? Which are the main enemies of patience? And how can we cope with that?
Main enemy, actually, the main enemy is anger, hatred. And we say, sure, there's many delusions which, as mentioned before, which is kind of produced also by anger, like we say, wrath is a kind of anger which is intensified. That means through the intensity of the anger, you're ready to use means in order to harm others. That, for example. Or what we call also is very much related to anger is outcome, and is, for example, we call it grudge. You cannot forgive. You cannot somehow forget the, let's say, the damage or what has happened to you by somebody else. You keep it very tightly, deep in your mind, really like a knot. You cannot let go things, and also somehow you try to take revenge. This is, how do you say, that attitude is very, very harmful for oneself, and it's also outcome. It's sure, and also what we call spite. That is, you're motivated to harm the others by your speech. You use very unpleasant, very ugly words just to harm the other. And then also jealousy is also related very much with anger. One cannot stand, let's say, qualities that others may have. One is kind of, you cannot bear that. It's by seeing that, one is very, very deeply agitated. Deeply agitated. And sure, there comes also cruelty. This is just cruelty, is that you're, how do you say, you like to belittle others, to put them down, to make them suffering. Or when you see others are doing that, also you're enjoying that. It's very, very negative. And this is linked with anger or with hatred, very, very much. And this is the practice of patience is just an opponent to that, like an antidote. Sure, there are certain attitudes, like if you have really cherishing love, also sure it opposes also. But in order to really to cultivate well a very kind of, how do you say, these attitudes of a cherishing love and compassion, and that it's really not biased or very kind of, to have really this as an attitude which is very broad. You have to cultivate it also, and for the cultivation you need patience. It's the same for any skills what we have when it comes to language or those skills in art. For example, when you learn a music instrument to master the violin or piano, you should be also patient because the process itself is not so easy always. There's a lot of trainings and maybe sometimes one feels tired or exhausted. But it's very important to for the cultivation. You need the patience. It's so important.
But the benefits are huge.
They're huge, yes. Yeah, if you see that, then also if you really clearly understand the benefits, then one is also ready to undergo those hardships. But also at the same time, you need them in order to train your mind. This is one thing. Let's say, to train patience, you need adversities. Otherwise, you cannot train it. How to know if your mind can really remain stable and calm, being not disturbed. If circumstances, everything is very, very comfortable and everybody is nice to you, sure, the mind may stay at rest and be at peace, but it does not mean that one has the capacity, obtained the capacity of patience. That is only proved. It can be proven when you encounter difficulties, if you manage, to transform that situation into something positive and wholesome. Then it's proven. Otherwise, not. Often great masters, they say, what they transmit to the disciples is the teaching, but often they say also the one who does then the examination, these are then all those others who give trouble to oneself. Then it's like the examination. It proves how well you have done your homework. And you can only do it through familiarization. It means you train it on a daily basis. Whatever, we encounter so many possibilities which are there, and then you try really to, by understanding the benefits of patience and seeing the disadvantages of anger, you try to acquaint with that. You train. And it's not so difficult to understand, because when you look in your mind, you see very clearly, is your mind agitated, or is it depressed already, or one feels completely offended? It's, in that sense, one knows actually, if one is honest to oneself. If one sees one is still agitated, okay, that means one has to learn more, to get more and more familiar with it. Because our way of reacting when we are criticized or when we experience loss and experience unpleasant things, that we react with anger is also nothing else than a sign, because we act spontaneously with anger and aversion, is also a sign that we have already so deeply familiarized with that way of reacting to difficulties, because it's spontaneous. You get criticized and one gets upset. And in that manner we have trained, over the years, over the decades, from childhood on probably. Therefore, that's the way how we react if something is unpleasant. Now you do also just the opposite. You try, when things are unpleasant, you try to react in a manner of being not disturbed. You learn that. And you will see your mind manages that. It's just a question of doing it. By doing it again and again and again, it gets a habit until it arises spontaneously. When it's spontaneously, it's like those great musicians. They have not to think what is the next thing to play. It just flows. This is a sign of deep, deep, deep familiarization. The piece of music they play, it becomes like their character. They get kind of inseparable with the piece of that. And here's similar. You try to acquaint your mind more and more that you have the capacity, regardless how the weather is, how the situation, how the people treat you, even if they're not nice to you, or even certain expectations are not fulfilled, you remain calm. You remain very, very stable.
One way is to consider that one who harms you as a stick, as a tool of a delusional mind.
Yes, yes, yes. This is a very famous example of what you mentioned, you know, with the stick. It comes just to illustrate when one is beaten by a stick, and then people often ask, why you don't get angry to the stick? Because that makes the pain, you know. That's actually what creates the pain. The stick meeting this very vulnerable body, you know, hitting, you know. Why don't you get angry at the stick? And people say, no, that makes no sense. I get angry to the person, because they say the argument, the main argument is they say, the stick has not the intention to harm me. It's the wielder of the stick. He has the intention. But then, if one does a good analysis, one will understand even the person who is wielding the stick, using it, in a similar manner as the stick is used by him, he is used, kind of wielded by his delusions. He has no control, he's just used, he's overpowered by the anger, and due to that, he has no control, he has no freedom, no liberty. He uses the stick in a very uncontrolled manner, and due to the anger, he is hitting you. And therefore, we say, the one who is responsible, actually, it's the anger behind that action. You know, if you, let's say, if you want to blame somebody, you don't blame the stick, you don't blame the person who is wielding it, but the delusion. And it's just showing that people often, as the stick has no freedom and no intention to harm, the person who does it is completely lacking any kind of having control on the mind. They're overpowered by the delusions, by the ignorance, having ignorance, sure, and then strong hatred or aversion makes them to act in those manners. And if you understand that, there's no sense to get upset, you know, then you're in the same position as the other one. And also it's important to remain calm, and sure, if you can escape, try to escape, that you don't get hit by the stick. If you don't manage, at least don't hit back, you know. But it's said, for those who are really advanced, it doesn't matter, you know, if they're hit or not, it doesn't matter. They're not disturbed.
The delusions come from the ignorance. In Buddhism, ignorance is the main troublemaker.
Yes, yes.
How can we cope with that?
Yes, ignorance is also, it's a delusion, it's a root delusion. And the delusions have all the, let's say, what they all share, you know, what we say, what we call 6 root delusions and 20 secondary delusions is like an outcome of the root delusions. They all share one feature. They have all a very disturbing character. As we know, when our mind there is pride, the mind is already also very agitated, or if there is attachment, also the mind gets also, one loses all the shared characteristic, that one loses the control on the mind, and also the peace of the mind is destroyed. When there arises pride, when there arises attachment, when there arises jealousy, when there arises negative doubts and so on, you lose your peace of the mind. They all share that. Now sure, there are certain delusions, one may think they have not such a disturbing character, for example, like laziness. You know, you can be very lazy, quite relaxed also, and one may wonder, how does that disturb? Where is there a disturbance? But also, in relation to certain practices, it has also a disturbing character in the sense of it kind of blocks you or obstructs the engagement in the wholesome. For example, to train also patience, it needs certain mental preparations. For that you need a certain effort. And if you're lazy, that is blocked by the laziness. Or if you want to cultivate, let's say, concentration, you need also a certain effort to train that. And if you're lazy, it comes in between, you know, it blocks you, it's an interference. In that sense, it has a disturbing character, and all delusions are disturbing character. Now, if you say, as you mentioned already, yeah, in Buddhism we see the very, very troublemaker, the very, very source of all problems is due to ignorance. Now, ignorance, we say this term marikpa in Tibetan, that means it's not a lack of knowledge. There are many things we don't know, it's not such a problem, but it's a wrong understanding actually. It's a wrong understanding due to the fact of being unclear about the nature of the phenomenon. And due of the fact of being confused, due to that is kind of the very, very source from where all the other delusions then derive. And it's very similar as that example which is often given. It's similar if you don't understand the nature, for example, of a rope which is on the ground and it's dark outside. If you don't understand it's just a rope, you're confused, you project on the rope a snake, sure, then all those other delusions, they arise very easily, there comes strong aversion, strong fear, or the wish to destroy that thing which is on the ground. It comes all because basically one is confused. Due to confusion, one is confused, and sure, we have also a lot of projections. And this is one part what the ignorance does. And that's the very ground from where all the problems are starting. Now, to overcome ignorance, one has to cultivate something, what is called an antidote, like a medicine, which helps you to cure the ignorance, to get rid of, little by little, more and more, and finally to replace it with wisdom. And to overcome the anger as a temporary means, let's say, it's very useful to practice patience. But finally, really to uproot anger, that it cannot arise anymore, sure, you have to uproot the ignorance as an ultimate, let's say, method. If the patience is more temporary, you can suppress or make them not arise, those delusions, like anger. But it's also very, very useful to manage that, to master it, have the skills, knowing that technique and doing it. It would be wrong to say, since I cannot uproot ignorance with patience, it has no value. It would be stupid. One should distinguish. There are many things which have a very, very important they have a temporary, great benefit, and they have to be used. They have to be used. It would be wrong. The temporary means, the ultimate means, sure, that's you have to cultivate wisdom. There's no, But also here, again, to cultivate wisdom cannot be isolated from patience, because also here, in the process of understanding, getting insight, to get certitude, you have also to make this not so easy, and you need patience here in this process. Otherwise, one easily gives up things. One says, it's too difficult, it's too hard, this and that. You must be patient,
You mentioned the real nature of things. In Buddhism is impermanence, vacuity, interdependence.
Yeah, as you mentioned, yes, it's important, yes. Yeah, you mentioned already, for example, this interdependence, whatever exists, regardless if it's being a material phenomena or mind or composed entities, they're being neither mind nor matter, there's like time and so on, or permanent entities like space and abstract phenomena, they all exist only interdependent. That means they don't exist from their own side as this and that. Always depending on, for example, when you have composed entities, like all those things what we perceive with our sensory consciousness, for example, let's say material phenomena which we perceive with our sensory consciousnesses, they share this, they're also always existing only interdependently. That means depending on the causes and conditions, depending on their parts, depending on the perceiving consciousness, depending on the denomination which is given to them. There's no other way. They don't exist from their own side as a chair or as a table and this and that, completely independently from perceiving mind. But due to ignorance, it appears to us as they would exist in that manner. And in that sense, we are, in that sense, we are confused, we are ignorant, we are unclear. Or what you said, impermanence, that's also one of the things, all composed entities, they share this characteristic of being impermanent. It means transitory, just really changing moment by moment, but it doesn't appear like that to us. It doesn't appear to our mind. It appears when we look just at that floor or at the door or at the wall or the images, they appear as something very stable, something which kind of remains, as something permanent. And in that sense, we are again confused because they're transitory, they're changing, like all situations. And there are many other things which appear to us as a happiness, but actually, if one analyzes more, one understands it's also linked to a lot of shortcomings and problems and sufferings. Therefore, many things we are confused to things which are impermanent, we don't understand the nature, we grasp them to something. The impermanent things we grasp as permanent. Things there in the suffering nature, we grasp them to be something being in the nature of happiness. Or things which are existing only dependently, we grasp them as something existing completely independently and completely existing inherently from its own side as this and that, as good and bad, as small and large. But that's not there. There is not something which is from its side, from the side of the object which has just a small shape or short shape. It doesn't exist. Only you can say, if you compare, you can say that shape is short in comparison to something which is a longer shape, But that longer shape itself can also be something very, very short in comparison to the shape of a mountain. And the mountain, again, is very, very... It depends from context and with what you compare. But it doesn't appear to us like that. We have that idea, if something has a short shape or is very small, it's from its own side, it's small, but it's not like that. Right? And now if you go further, these very famous examples, we see even this idea what we have about I and you, or I and others. And we have this very strong notion that is independently existing I on this side and there the others. But it's also very relatively existing. From your side, you can say you're I, and I become you. And for those others of your disciples, I become not even you, I've just become it's he or somebody. And for somebody being in great distance, it's completely insignificant in my existence. There's no relevance. And this is very relative, but we make such a strong distinction between I and others, and due to that notion, we not only we have a wrong perception of ourselves, but first we have this wrong perception about ourselves, then sure we cherish ourselves much more, we regard ourselves much more important than others. One thinks oneself is much more important, which actually is stupid because one is just one single person and the others are so many. And through cherishing oneself so much, one feels also very easily then, all those who seem to help that fictional, I would say, self or I, we easily have very strong attachment, we like them and so on. All those who oppose that fictional self or I, we have aversion, and due to that, one is already completely entangled with those delusions of strong aversion and strong clinging or attachment. And then the mind being so disturbed by these delusions of strong clinging and strong aversion, then all those different adversities come into existence, all those wrongdoings. That means one tries by any means to overcome those whom we dislike, and just try to protect and guard those ones whom one regards so precious. It's very much linked to the wrong idea what we have about ourselves, very, very strongly linked. Because the self appears to us also very existing from its own side, not depending on those things, like depending on the base of imputation, like one's body and mind. Completely, there's a self from its own side, like an owner or like a ruler, very concrete and very important. And one cherishes that so much. And due to that, one is so confused about that. And then one does a lot of stupid things. But not understanding, this is the problem, not understanding how oneself exists, how others are existing, being confused about the impermanence, and there's so many things. And this is the very root, is the ignorance. Not knowing that means understanding wrongly, because one has no clarity. This is lacking the clarity. Is the same if you have a darkness in that room, let's say, when it's very, very dark. Sure, you can see there are some images on the walls, but what is really depicted, one will be not able to know, to see, if it's very gloomy here and dark. And then one starts to guess what is on that image. But this is very tricky, There's a lot of, how do you say, one assumes and projects a lot of things on referring to that object, which will not correspond. That means the way
we do the same on people.
Yeah, we do that actually. The way how we do that actually. The way how what we project is not in accordance to the actual mode of existence. That's the thing, We do that continuously, and through that process, it's so difficult to encounter others, because what one encounters is one's made up images, what one has about others. Already one is very rigid. One has an image and says, oh, she's bad, and he's also a bad guy, and so on, this and that. And by that, everything is blocked already. And anyway, you cannot reduce a person just, how do you say, saying he's bad or she's bad. It's anyway, it's how do you say, one should be very careful with those things, and also to differentiate, and also it's so difficult on our level really to understand also another person. Really knowing is so complex. And what we see from outside, I tell always people, what do you see? You just see the shape and the color of the body. But the shape and the color of the body is not the person. But we so easily judge how somebody looks like, but this is I think it's just a damage for oneself also, because if you're open to another person, and there's such a richness there, and so many things, the other things it blocks, and I think also the way how we perceive often things, it's really, the way of perception doesn't correspond to the actual mode of existence. And that's the thing.
And that principle can be applied not only by monks and nuns, but every one of us.
Anybody, anybody. This is very universal things, it would be very sad if it would be applied by anybody, regardless of, as I said before, who he is. Doesn't matter, These are very universal things. How do you say, the more open you are, the better your relationship to others is, the better will be also your understanding, because many things we can only understand through having this good relationship with others, and when they start to tell about this and that, then one understands a little bit better how they behave also in certain manners. For example, why a person is unfriendly. There's also reasons behind. We often separate the person. We just say he's not greeting us and therefore he's unfriendly. But you cannot reduce the person to an unfriendly person because he's not greeting. There's reasons why he's not greeting, or why he does not whatever, behave in certain manners. You know, maybe due to the fact that he himself or the person has to undergo certain difficulties in his or in her life, and due to that, she acts in a certain manner. But we always isolate things, and that's not so good. You cannot. But one will see of the way how we judge. It really, I would say, 99%. We fail in that completely. It doesn't correspond. But somehow we stubbornly believe and hold very strong and very tightly to that idea. How we perceive things exactly, it's the way how they exist, you know. And how I do it, it's right, it's correct, it's valid, but it's often we fail completely. You know,
we are living near a horrible war. Which is the proper way to understand? Because it's unbelievable that it happens.
yes.
And which is the proper way to deal with?
The war is also an expression of nothing. Is an expression also due to deep, heavy ignorance and wrong views. You know, and anger, sure, and hatred. It manifests, and sure, it's. And the more people think in that direction, sure, the more violence you have. You know, and sure, it's a great tragedy, you know, with such sufferings, you know, unbelievable, you know. It's hellish experience, really hell. It's a hell, like a hell realm, what people have to go through. And you know, from Buddhist point of view, it's very clear. You can never justify violence. You know, you should never harm others. It's completely wrong to do that. Now comes this very, very difficult thing is often this discussion, we had it also recently, how do you say, sure, if one looks back in history of humanity, it's a history of wars actually. You know?
And madness.
Madness, it's really madness. And therefore it also shows the importance of culture, you know, because culture is something, it shows that some other things are important and we have to take care on that, you know, like, and if that is lost, the culture, then you reach those, how do you say, those mentalities and states where the violence becomes something very normal and accepted. It's very, very bad. There's also even a prophecy by Buddha himself, because we live in a degenerated time and the history is really characterized by wars, completely so unnecessary. But he says even it goes so down in the degenerated times that the final ornament which is worn by humans are weapons. And the mental state which is predominant, he describes it, is strong hatred. What kind of, sure, it doesn't mean it's always hatred there, but it kind of dominates. And there's a lot of descriptions about that and about environment and even about colors and so on. And about taste also, how it becomes more and more kind of poor, more and more reduced. And what finally remains is very, very bitter taste, very dark colors, and being full of strong aversion and wearing weapons. And one can see many places in this world, unfortunately, where there's just war. There's war going on since many, many years. And now, sure, that's the worst thing what can happen, you know. Now one has to avoid it by any means. And sure, there comes always this very difficult question, now how to react to that, you know. Now this is...
I ask you because in Buddhism they said it's okay to oppose to violence. It's your attitude. So if someone hits me with a stick, I can oppose him, and But important is how is my mind doing that.
Yeah, sure. How to say? Sure, the state of mind is always important. But let's say for me as a monk, for example, if my life would be endangered or somebody is going to kill me,
Yeah.
it would be no solution for me to kill the other. It's not acceptable. One has to sacrifice one's life actually. But anyway, we say also, according to Buddhists, we say even when you sacrifice your life, the worst thing what an enemy can do to you is just he kills you. But in long term, it cannot harm you. It's all what goes beyond that existence. But if you commit the negativity of killing, it will have a very strong and negative effect in long term. When you have this concept of karma, cause and effect in long term, and also this idea about continuation of consciousness, and then you sacrifice your life. You say there's not so much damage. It's a greater damage if you kill the other. You don't do that. But now, how do you say? That's not so easy. It's not so easy. But we have also this attitude, if you really think deep on death and impermanence, anyway one has to give up one's life, sooner or later. And it's also good to be a little bit acquainted already and prepared. It's also good to be prepared always for one's own deaths on a daily basis. And we say, when it comes to attitude, we say those actually, the real hero, doesn't matter male or female, the real hero is the one who overcomes the anger, not the one who destroys the life of others. We say destroying the life of somebody else is like stabbing a knife into a corpse, because if you wait sufficiently long, that enemy anyway, he'll also pass away, they will not live forever. And but there is also the chance that the enemy can also change, he can also become a friend. There's the possibility there, if one is skillful, with a certain skillful methods and wisdom, they can also become a friend. A delusion never becomes a friend. Anger never turns into love. You understand? Enemy can turn into a friend. There's a possibility there. But hatred never turns into cherishing love. Therefore, for us, is having the attitude of anger and acting under the influence of anger or destroying the life of others because they inflicted harm to us is no solution. It just leads to an enormous increase of more violence, more victims, more, just to more sufferings. You understand? It's just that. Sure, now we have a war, and people always say then one has the hope the more weapons are delivered, somehow you can that's the solution. There's so much hope in the weapons, But I think it increases the problem. Increases with more problems. One has, I think, sure, it's very, very difficult. I'm not in the position. It's very delicate, but I tell all these people, reflect yourself on the basis, try to figure out about the extent of damage. In what case is the extent of damage more extensive? Let's say. I'll give the example. For example, if you make some compromise, whatever, in a certain situation, you offer the land to the invaders, or you capitulate. Sure, there's a lot of sufferings. You have to undergo. You have to then to follow the rules of the new rulers of the country and so on, and people will be suppressed and so on. This is one thing, Sure, there should no doubt. On the other side, if the war reaches such an intensity and the weapons we have nowadays, in relation to the destructiveness and the reach they have, the nuclear weapons also, finally there remains nothing. Everything is destroyed. not only for one existence, for thousands of years, I can even say millions, will be contaminated by radiation. And there's the risk is there, which was not excluded, and the destruction can go so far that there are only losers, what remains only losers on both sides. And what is very important when it comes to that point also, to have compassion not only for the victims, but also for those who inflict the harm. This is very important. I think also this is also very, very difficult for those who are invading now, these young soldiers, and also being completely confused due to propaganda, this and that. They're also human beings. They have their families, they have their parents. I think each person who is dying and is killed in such a conflict, it's a disaster, it's a tragedy, Not only for one side and for the other, for both sides. It's really a disaster. It's really a tragedy. But it's due to, it's really this mind, this is problem. The deepest suffering in Buddhism is having this uncontrolled, untamed mind. A war is an expression of an untamed mind. And it can be on a very kind of small scale, like in a relationship, a conflict, also violence, but also on a very extended, in the sense of on a collective level, what takes place now is a ripening, between these two countries, what happens. But sure, there's also many other countries also involved, in this war already. There's so many. And I think it's wrong to have hatred to those, to the intruders or to the perpetrators. They're also object of compassion. It's very harmful for themselves. But when you go back, when you see the root of the problem, sure, it's really deep ignorance. And ignorance, sure, is here in that case, is ignorance and wrong views. Sure, it's nourished by, propaganda and those things. It shows again the power of language. How we can manipulate with language. That people have wrong concepts, wrong ideas, wrong views. And that's the starting point. Whatever we do it according to our view of seeing things. And if the view is a very hostile one, a very narrow one, sure, it creates a lot of problems. If the view is a very open one, and really based on being on compassion, the outcome is something completely different. And I think it is one of the tasks, at least also in the culture, to preserve somehow some values. We say with a saying, we say the eyes of the culture is very thin. If that breaks, then let's say the step to be a barbarian is very, very close, because we have no any values more than, then one is very easily becomes, falls into this very, very cruel behaviors, yes, of killing and mistreating others and so on. It's a pity. It's a great, great tragedy. And how to solve it? I think it can be only solved in long term. I think through knowledge, through education. I think that is the most important. If that is not there, very difficult. Therefore, I think the knowledge and the right understanding is so important and so cherished also in Buddhism. This having really deep, appreciation for knowledge, for understanding is so important. But sure, when it comes about understanding, one of the most important things is to understand one's mind. Because from there everything starts. It's the starting point. By not understanding the mind, and sure, it is very, very difficult. It's very difficult. Yeah, hopefully hopefully they find a solution somehow that the extent of damage will be reduced somehow. And sure, one has to negotiate. Sure, some others say there's no negotiation possible. But anyway, whatever is said, one has to try by all means, to reduce the extent of damage. And sure, one has to undergo compromises, and some will be not agreeable at all. Sure, no doubt about that. But it's tricky, it's very difficult, because it has already such a dynamic, Therefore, we say, when we're saying also, when the delusions, when they arise at the beginning, let's say, when in our mind arises aversion, at the beginning state, it's quite easy to overcome the delusions because they're still weak. It's like a small fire. If the fire is still very, very small, let's say, if something burns somewhere, you can easily extinguish the fire because it has no power. But if you don't care on that, you leave it, at a certain time, the fire will be so violent and you have no chance more to extinguish it. The same is with those things. When a war already is a manifestation by many, many things which have preceded already in the past. And one didn't take care on that. Now it's fire. Huge fire, And then what to do? Not really difficult.
And it's the same situation with anger.
Same. Oh, we say it's the kind of destructive among the different shortcomings of delusions, but that's the most destructive one is hatred, anger, It's quite obvious. We say on an external level, but also on the internal level, on the mind also. How it affects one's mind. That's really one should try, regardless what you believe in, try to avoid that, And if you don't manage with somebody else, you see, then maybe just keep some distance, but try not to get overpowered by anger, It's really something very, very, very ugly, really something very ugly, It's had no benefit there, not at all, only harm. Harm and pain, infinite pains, are created by that, infinite sufferings, with such intensity, But you see, all those creations of weapons, so frightening. Those weapons themselves, it's nothing else. It's creation of the evil mind. It comes not out of compassion or of wisdom. It's the creation of ignorance and especially of hatred. They're constructed, very well done, in the negative sense. It's so frightening when you read, about those possibilities they have. But still, it's important as when you practice patience, you live in that world. You have to face those things and try to remain calm. It's important, and do whatever can be done still, so many things to do for your fellow other sentient beings around you, for your parents or your relatives or your friends on a daily basis, It would be wrong to think there's no need to do those things because the world anyway will be destroyed. It's completely wrong. As a Buddhist, you use any situation, every instant of that existence, to train the mind and to cultivate it. Even if you have to pass away in this very day, you do it. You continue. You do it. That's the very moment. In the very moment, because there's a benefit, especially in long term.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. Thank you very much for the invitation, and also thank you very much to your disciples being here. But it's beautiful, really. You just also should rejoice living in such a place.
Mulțumim și dumneavoastră că ați fost alături de noi. Aceasta a fost emisiunea. Toate cele bune!